So as mentioned, I'm the founder and the CEO of Aparito, and we founded January of last year with Bethnal Green investment seed funding, and then we were awarded the Unlimited Millennia Award, and December of last year we were awarded the Nominet Trust Tech for Good award because of the work that we've been doing with patient groups. And the reason we are now located in this building is that as of January of this year, we were also awarded a place on the WIRA MSD Velocity Health scheme. But I guess just to put a bit of context, I'm a children's nurse by background, got involved in recruiting children into clinical trials. And through that experience, and then going on to work at the European Medicine Agency to regulate pharmaceutical industry in terms of their development plans for paediatric studies and rare disease studies, and just sort of became increasingly frustrated with the way that clinical trials in children and rare diseases were being done. And my CTO has also worked in the health sector for a very long time. Randomly, we both went to school together, but that's a different story. But I think just to sort of put it in context, we know that capturing clinically meaningful patient data is extremely challenging, and as a result, clinical trials fail and reimbursement application from NHS England or health technology assessment also fail because we're not able to demonstrate the value of the drug in the real world setting. And of course, to compound things, the doctors that are left to make the clinical decision about which drug to go for is made even harder. So if we look at something as simple as walking, of course is not simple at all, it doesn't matter what the pathology that's impacting on your ability to walk is. For the patient, the result effect is that it has a major impact on your quality of life. And when we look at the current tests that are being used to assess gait and ambulation in hospitals, while there are some very sophisticated 3D gait analysis sort of things available, in most clinical trials that are being used at the moment, they refer to what's called the 6-minute walk test. And it's basically a very crude, simple test where the patient is asked to walk up and down a 25-meter track for 6 minutes. And then based on how many meters they've walked in that 6 minutes, it tells you an indicator of their health at that time. And as you can imagine, it's a very crude snapshot assessment of a child's or a patient's health. And in a clinical trial that costs millions to run, that can last for 2 years, you end up relying on what's just 18 minutes worth of data for the sort of start, medium, and halfway through and end part of the study. And it's really sort of challenging to put that in the context of the patient's day-to-day life. When a patient comes for a clinical trial or even indeed clinical monitoring, they get randomized to take either drug A or drug B. Sometimes drug B could be a placebo, or sometimes it can be an active comparator. And by using this approach, we're assuming that the disease progression or disease response to drug will be a linear sort of pattern. But of course, in reality, patients' experience is far from being linear, and there's a lot of up and down in the patient's sort of journey, and a lot of external factors that can impact upon them. And so when they come for the repeat assessment, it really is a bit of a game as to, you know, where they'll be in their disease progression or in their wellness health level at the date of that visit. And actually what we should be thinking of, how are they doing overall compared to what their baseline disease was. So the impact of relying on this very sterile snapshot assessment of patients' well-being while they come to hospital is massive in the rare disease community. So there are around 7,000 rare diseases, 75% of whom are children. And so to try and do clinical trials in this group in particular is very, very challenging because the disease presentation is heterogeneous, but also the disease progression tends to be very heterogeneous. And a recent publication by the FDA reported that 42% of paediatric clinical trials fail. And when we say fail, we don't mean that the drug didn't work, we mean that the results were inconclusive, so we're not able to make a judgment on the safety or the efficacy of the drug. And so that's a massive ethical and economical implication. And even if pharmaceutical companies get past the marketing authorization for a drug, they then still have to get the HTA to agree to reimburse it. And in the rare disease community, we know that 37% of the drugs are not being reimbursed because of poor real-world effectiveness data. So what we've sort of done at Aparito to try and address this is to bring in wearable technology, linking it up to a disease-specific app, and then have it available on a web app portal for the clinician or the researcher as required. The wearable device that we're currently using has got a 6-month battery life and is waterproof and uses Bluetooth, which means that it has very little impact on the patient's quality of life, and children like it because it doesn't look like a medical device. And the 4 features that we've got in the app are linked very much to the data requirements that both regulators and reimbursement agency look for in making a decision about the safety and efficacy of a drug. So the patient has an opportunity to record adverse events that might be linked to the drug itself or part of the disease. And we change these in terms of what's a highly occurring adverse event for that study, but there's always another button. And that means that in that very sort of stressful clinic appointments that patients get with their doctor, they're not trying to rely on memory recall of what happened when, at which frequency and which intensity, because the data's been captured in real time and is available for the doctor to go through with them at that time. There's also a medication adherence facility on the app. We also know that patients with chronic disease really find it difficult to adhere to the drug regimen. It could be because they don't actually find the drug works that well and so they choose not to take it as they should. It could be because they suffer such bad side effects that they can't tolerate it, or it could be that they genuinely forget to take the drug. And so by giving them text notifications when a medication is due facilitates that, but also works as a medication sort of diary. And then the third feature is about healthcare usage. We know that HTAs and reimbursement agency want to understand what the healthcare needs of the disease groups are. And so by capturing this part, it contributes to that evaluation. And most importantly is patient-reported outcome. So we're moving very much towards a patient-centric approach now, where we're putting patients' context at the center of it. And current versions of quality of life patient-reported outcomes are very often given as paper version in a very noisy clinic waiting area. And so by using this app, the patients get pushed the scales and they can complete them in the comfort of their own home. And because it's sort of recorded electronically straight away, we don't have to worry about copy error when it's being copied from the paper version to the database, or indeed the paper version going lost, which is another frequent one. So by combining those 4 features of the app, it's then available on the web app for the doctor. So the wearable gives you very objective data about how the patient's doing, while the additional data puts the context of how the patient was feeling, how their medication adherence was doing, and that sort of thing. And if we look at then the sort of very high level overview, the system is sort of built that it can be modified and personalized for each disease or each study, but there are current features that are the same. And the biggest feature that's sort of changing at the moment is whether the data is kept as a data warehouse for exporting into sort of SBS statistical analysis platform, or whether we're going to bring, whether the doctor prefers to have a dashboard for real-time analytics to facilitate clinical monitoring, and that will be launched this summer. So we believe that this sort of platform actually offers benefits to all the stakeholders involved in the drug development pathway. As I've already mentioned, there's a real focus now in terms of moving towards patient-centric drug development and patient-centric care. And so by allowing the patients to be in charge of the data collection, they're more empowered and more engaged if they have the right platform to do so. Since we started last year, we have a few studies up and running. A first one was actually rolled out in India earlier this year with a consultant from Great Ormond Street, who runs compassionate access scheme for patients with Gaucher disease in India. And the challenge there was that they have a certain amount of drug that they're able to distribute, and understanding which patients should have access to that drug based on disease severity. So it was, the first idea really was to see, could this sort of technology be implemented in India, and would it be well received by the patients? And we had a great experience. We were very well received, and we'll be presenting the data in June to the Global Alliance to see about rolling it out into other countries that are running similar compassionate access scheme. Our first paediatric study was here in London at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and is now extended to Manchester and about to be extended to Amsterdam. And our third study was actually sponsored by the patient group themselves, because they're keen to learn more about the natural history of neuronopathic Gaucher disease, particularly as they know that there are studies on the horizon, and they want to be able to sort of understand themselves what are the endpoints that are going to be important to them as patient groups to measure. And the summer of this year, we're actually going to America as well to run a study at the National Institute of Health. Those diseases there are sort of rare orphan diseases that I mentioned, and the other two that we're still in discussion with is juvenile idiopathic arthritis and chronic fatigue syndrome. And I think what I'm sort of keen to illustrate here that the choice of the wearable can be changed according to what's important to be monitored for that disease, and we always make the app disease specific in terms of event or patient reported outcomes that are to be covered. And that's it. That's all from me.